coming. So for this event, we're going to have a few words of introduction to the paintings and prints of Margo McNulty, which you see here on the wall, and also the launch of a new book she has from Red Fox Press, which is on sale at the back of the room. So this work here, on the exhibit, was part of a larger exhibition that took place in Tullamore in the Esker Art Centre earlier this year. So we have two speakers who have an interest in the work of Margo McNulty. The first speaker is Heinrich Böll, and he's known to us here, of course, as a supporter of the residency at the Böll Cottage, and these weekends he comes to most of them, I think, and he's a great supporter of the work of the Heinrich Böll Association, and he's a painter and a printmaker, and using ink as well, using drawings in ink. He's made several exhibitions, several bodies of work based on the Achill landscape, which he was familiar with when he was younger, when he was a kid. And our second speaker is Luke Gibbons. Luke is from County Roscommon, and he's a retired teacher from Maynooth. He's also written on James Joyce, and he's written about two artists from Roscommon. He's written, three artists. Margo is one, but two others he's written from Ballaghaderreen, and this is a very funny story. Two of the great Irish artists, Patrick Ireland or Brian O'Doherty has his name, and is mentioned earlier in the earliest talks, and James Coleman. And two little stories that I mentioned to Luke last night. One is when in Cologne, in the Ludwig Museum of Modern Art, right in the centre of town. One day, meandering through the abstract expressionists and late modernist exhibits, I came upon a slide installation by James Coleman, and written on the little plaque by the door to tell you what it is you were going to look at was James Coleman Ballaghaderreen. As if everybody in Cologne knew. Another story is in Heinrich Böll's short story, Absent Without Leave. There's a piece in the story where the narrator is talking about where one is from, and the text says something to the effect of, well, you could be from Freiburg, you could be from Munich, you could be from Berlin, or you could be from Ballaghaderreen. And he goes on for a few sentences about what would happen if you were from Ballaghaderreen, without explaining where Ballaghaderreen is. Okay, so we're going to start with Heinrich Böll.
Good afternoon. For me it's a great honor and a pleasure to open this wonderful exhibition of my colleague Margo McNulty about the deserted village and the surroundings like the Napoleon's Tower. The deserted village has a great importance for me and my family. We first visited the village in 1955 when I was only 7 years old. We passed some hours in the village, and my father wrote the article, A Skeleton of a Human Habitation. So the deserted village became part of the world literature. It now is a hotspot of ecotourism. The first ordnance survey of Achill Island in 1838 showed the village at Sleafmore to be occupied. Less than 20 years later, following the ravages of the Great Famine, a traveller to the island described the village as deserted. A scientific study of the field surrounding the abandoned village, archaeological investigations and historical research have established that this site has been used as a settlement since at least the Anglo-Norman period in the 12th century, the discovery of a megalithic tomb near the village dating to 3rd or 4th century before Christ suggests that people were already living in this area about 5 or even 6,000 years ago. Now I read one of my favorite quotes from the Irish Journal. The old woman living in the house next us, we were living in Kiel at the time, couldn't tell us when the village has been abandoned. When she was a little girl, about 1888, it was already deserted. Of her 6 children, only 2 remained in Ireland. 2 live and work in Manchester, 2 in the United States. 1 daughter is married here in the village. This daughter has 6 children, of whom in turn will probably go. 2 will go to England and 2 to the United States. And the eldest son stayed with her from far off. From far off, when he comes with the cattle from the pasture, he looks like a 16-year-old. When he turns the corner of the house into the village street, you feel he must be in his mid-30s. And when he then passes the window and grins shyly into the window, you can see that he is 50. He doesn't want to get married, says his mother. Isn't it a shame? Yes, it's a shame. He is so diligent and clean. He painted the gate red, also the stone knobs on the wall. Blue were the windows, frames beneath the green moss roof. Humor dwelled in his eye, and tenderly he patted his donkey on the back. In the evening, when we go to get the milk, we ask him about the abandoned village, but he has nothing to tell us about it. He has never been there. They have no pasture there, and the pits are also in another direction, south, not far from the monument of the Irish patriot who was hanged in 1799. Have you seen it? Yes, we saw it. And Tony walks away again as a 50-year-old, is transformed at the corner into a man of 30, becomes a 16-year-old boy at the top of the slope. And when he strokes the donkey as he passes, and when he stops for a moment at the fuchsia hedge, he disappears, and he disappears behind the hedge. He looks as the boy he once was. It's the end of the quote. And I still remember his face really very nearly, because he was a very friendly guy with us children. So we played with his dogs and his donkeys, and he was very, very, very nice neighbor to us. Sorry. The deserted village looks romantic today, but life here was very hard. Until now we can see the lazy beds, masterly captured in Margo's paintings and etchings. For the potatoes and the very, very small houses where people live together with the cattle. I read the book Famine by Lionel Flaherty about the terrible years Ireland suffered in the mid-19th century with the potato pest, and probably one of the main reasons for the Great Hunger, as it was called, was the exportation of big amounts of foodstuff like wheat, oat, barley, rolled oats like livestock and animal products, beef, butter, bacon, pork, pigs, sheep, honey, eggs, and vegetables to the colonial master Great Britain. The British administration was aware that the export means agonizing death of so many people, and perhaps they did not only accept it, but even welcomed it. I believe this book gives a good impression of what hard life was like back in these times. In her paintings and etchings, Margo sees beyond the visible, uncovering and revealing the hidden history of this village, creating a magnificent memorial to the people who lived and suffered here, many of whom died of hunger or were forced to emigrate. Memorial with brush and color, full of heartfelt emotions, with masterful command of painting techniques. What looks easy is the most difficult to do in painting and art. She gets the color of the echo, especially the green, the grayish green, and the blue sky. Perhaps she is also creating a memorial to her ancestors with a brush and paint. A search for traces. I remember in the mid-50s some houses were still covered roofs, probably using for the bowling. No one lived in these houses since the time of the famine. However, the families that moved to Duar and their descendants continued to use the village as a bowling village. This means that during the summer season, the younger members of the family, teenage boys and girls, would take the cattle to graze on the hillside, and they would stay in the houses of the deserted village. This custom continued until the 1940s. Bowling was also carried out in other regions, in areas of Ekil, including the bowling village in Kim, Anach, Back of Sleeve Moor, and in Koran. Margo passed many times in private and public archives to find traces about the deserted village. There are very few traces. It's like the former village of Vinchin in Dugord, a village not only deserted but nearly without any physical and historical traces. All the best with your exhibition, dear Margo. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay. I'm like the priest trying to see the whole congregation here. As a Roscommon person, I feel I should apologise for being in Mayo after the defeat of the Mayo team in the Connacht Championship. So I hope you'll bear with me throughout the proceedings. And my voice, forgive my voice, it's not exactly of RTE quality. I have a chest infection and I'm up to my eyes and antibiotics and everything. So, and I wish I had, when I teach, I have a pointer, a laser pointer for going around images. I wish I had it. So I'll make references to various images. So you'll have to turn your head and try and see what I'm angling towards. So one of the most, not least in fact, of the uncanny aspects of Margo McNulty's art is the fascination or the eye for the invisible as well as the visible. What's unseen, what's off camera, what's hidden in history. And the greatest work on perception in philosophy in the 20th century by the French philosopher Merleau-Ponty, he said, at the heart of the visible lies the invisible. There's a blind spot in everything you see. There's something not being shown, something hidden from view. And it's almost as if Margo has an uncanny eye for being attracted to for what cannot be shown and what cannot lend itself to instant visibility. In her exhibition, Tin Town, was it 2019, I think, just before COVID, her exhibition dealt with the internment of her granduncle, Aeneas McNulty, in the Curragh detention camp during World War II. And his tragic fate in that he died soon after his release. Many died on hunger strike, actually, in the harsh conditions of what was called Tin Town because of the galvanised iron of the huts and the camps. But it being Margo, her eye was drawn to something also off stage or hidden from view. And that was the 250 German prisoners of war across the road, living in what must have seemed like then Butlin's holiday camp after the savage conditions of war. So you had this stark contrast between the Republican prisoners, over 2,000 of them, living in harsh conditions, and over 250 German prisoners of war being allowed out to Newbridge to go to movies, to go to films, even to go to Dublin. All they had to do was promise to come back. And the Republican prisoners watching this contrast. And it's uncanny that at the time those German prisoners of war were having, as we say, the life of Riley in detention. Another German prisoner of war, Heinrich Böll, was in detention in Germany under American forces as a conscript into the Wehrmacht. Böll also saw prison as a place you want to escape into rather than out of if you're living through the horrors of World War II. And it's uncanny again that in the earlier presentations, another prisoner of war comes up, Joseph Boys. And in Nigel's and Sean's and Emily's, Tim's presentation, the way Boys' experience as a Luftwaffe pilot scarred his memory for the rest of his life. Another coincidence, which sounds like the uncanny again, is that Heinrich Böll's first contact, or maybe his first major contact when he came to Ireland, was George Fleischmann, a cinematographer in the Luftwaffe, who had been part of Leni Riefenstahl's extraordinary filming team at the Berlin Olympics in 1936. And Fleischmann was a cinematographer for the German Air Force. And it's hard not to suspect that when he was flying over Ireland, he would have seen the giant letters, ERA, embossed on the Irish landscape by the Irish government to tell aircraft they were entering Irish territory and Ireland was neutral. And I think I'm right in saying some of these giant letters are embossed on the Achill landscape, Achill being a key point of contact. And it was hard not to suspect that not only would he have seen them, but he also would have seen what Margo has depicted in the blue lithograph halfway down of walls from the deserted village that for all practical purposes looked like letters trying to assemble themselves into words but making no sense. In fact, you would almost suspect that the words they were trying to write from the deserted village were help and SOS. We are in danger of extinction. So that idea of aerial views becomes a signature in the paintings directly of the deserted village that Margo has on the walls here. And ironically, it introduces a kind of an irony that even though they're aerial views, there is no distance. There is no horizon in the first place. And when you take the horizon out of an image, you take distance and detachment and vanishing point. And you flatten out the landscape when there's no horizon. And that means, like the song by the band, every distance becomes near. So when you flatten out the horizon, every distance becomes near. And instead of the view from above, it becomes the view from within. It becomes the view from those immersed in the landscape and those actually on the ground rather than off the ground. And in the larger exhibition in Tullamore in the Esker Centre, Margo has depictions of the kind of images, the few images rural dwellers, Irish farmers would have on their walls. And among them, in pride of place, and we even had it in primary school books, was Millet's The Angelus. Lesser would be the Gleaners, but these pictures of the rural dwellers, what used to be called the peasantry, on the ground, were Millet's attempt to show landscape from within, rather than landscape from without, to show the view from those who live in the land and on the land. It's remarkable that one of the books, and this is a whole story of Boll's, which is so impressive and needs an awful lot of more erudition and elucidation than I can give, is his work as a translator with his remarkable wife, Anne-Marie Jack. But among the works, so they almost introduced the canon of Irish literature in translation, from O'Flaherty, from O'Casey, from James Plunkett, from Ailish Dillon, Flann O'Brien. But one of the works they introduced was, or they translated, was The Island Man, on Tillanach, by Thomas O'Crohan. And in his remarkable essay on Tillanach, on The Island Man, John McGahern, the novelist, wrote that O'Crohan and the Blasket Islanders were not good sightseers. They weren't that good at scenery. In fact, they didn't even notice scenery. He says McGahern, you'll find no idle stretches describing daffodils and the likes in O'Crohan's view of the Ascot Islands. They had much more to be doing than Wordsworth, walking around, noticing things that he knew little about. And I think that catches the whole notion of what it is to view from within, that on Tillanach, that Margo has been trying to bring into these images of Achill. That rather than, the so-called picturesque or the tourist view, you're getting what it was like. And I thought it was very moving when Hugo Hamilton described yesterday that the only time locals looked at scenery, and I thought he described it very well, that last longing look through the back of the bus as it was leaving Westport for good, leaving the island for good. In other words, the only time you began to notice what other people were coming to view was when you were leaving it, in some cases forever. So that whole idea of trying to bring out that view from within and not the view from without, I think marks the notions of landscape as without distance, without detachment, without perspective, because it's perspective that introduces detachment. But it's kind of interesting that in relation to the lack of perspective, that if you go around the images and then you switch to the images of what would be called the Napoleonic tower on the landscape, you get again a reminder of what World War II was prefigured by, and that was the fears of invasion, which the British establishment entertained for centuries because of the anxieties of Spanish or French invasions. For good reason, because Ireland was the Achilles heel of empire. And again, it's by one of these coincidences, or what Freud liked to call the uncanny, that Achill was the original choice for the French invasion, organised by Napoleon. And his appointed commander was this remarkable general, the Baron de Kilmaine, called after Kilmaine in County Mayo, where his family were from, where his roots were from. And it was thwarted at the last minute. Again, you can imagine the historical research. Kilmaine was displaced onto Egypt. And then the French landed at Killala in a much smaller 1,000 combatants. But Achill was the original kind of source of entry into the back room of Ireland. And what's interesting is that for some reason the Martello Towers on Mayo or on Achill are square-shaped, as if mimicking the walls of the deserted village. Of course, they were not built with no roofs or no ceilings. They all look together now, but it's an uncanny irony of history that the commanders, the people who built the surveillance towers to look over the peasantry as much as possible invasion forces, that they are now reduced to the same ruined condition as the cottages and the hovels that they presided over. And Margo catches this sense of entrapment in those images, the three images down there, in marked contrast to the so-called expanses of the landscape. But in a way, those images of the Napoleonic towers are in dialogue with another exhibition of Margo's, done in, I think, 2022, of Kilmainham Jail. And that was, I think, a remarkable signature for the decade of centenaries commemorating the age of revolution in Ireland. And what Margo did was try to bring to Kilmainham Jail, and particularly to the experience of women in Kilmainham Jail, this feeling of entrapment. But again, because she's always attracted to what's off stage, there's a wonderful passage in John McGahern's That They May Face the Rising Sun, when Rutledge, the McGahern figure, is building a shed out the back with the handyman who never turns up to say he thinks it's a cathedral they're building out the back, this garden shed. But when they're standing in the shed and they're putting on the roof, Rutledge says, you know, sometimes I think it's better to look at the sky through a skylight than to look at it when there's no limits. And Patrick says, you must be, it's gone to your head. What's wrong with you? But you can see what Rutledge and what McGahern is saying, that looking through a window can open up more sometimes than looking without any boundaries at all. And in fact, what Margo is attracted to in Kilmainham and is the window and the door that opens onto, and again, this is Oscar Wilde's wonderful phrase, that tent of blue that prisoners call the sky, because that is the way prisoners look at the sky, through a window, the tent of blue. So it's remarkable then in the final range of Margo's paintings, the sky is introduced. Having been eliminated from the paintings of the deserted village, you begin to see Slieve Moor, and you begin to see the horizon, and you begin to see scuffed clouds. But again, there's an irony, because when it was said several times earlier that landscape is not just what's above ground is what's underground. So the deserted village could be almost seen as headstones for buried histories, as much of what's underneath the soil as what's overground. And it's again, the middle image in particular looks as if it's a cross-section of a mountain. I'm not saying it's intended to be. It looks as if it's a cross-section of a mountain tunnelling down into the ground. And indeed, in the exhibition in Tullamore in the Esker Centre, Margo introduced what might be called archaeologies of feeling. Deep feelings lodged in old pieces of cups, of ceramic fragments, clay pipes, broken cups, handles, bits of plates, deposited in the landscape and unearthed by industrial archaeologists in recent years, so that you look just beneath the soil and you find the remnants. So it's almost like the census of 1926, except it's through material fragments left behind by people. So that whole idea of material culture, of material fragments, and the sky then introduces, I think, a notion of release, a notion of expectation. You nearly say a notion of hope, that the deep past is being transcended and translated into a new kind of medium. And the fact that we're talking about material culture brings me to the book that we're launching. Because it's remarkable, any teacher will tell you now, and there's a number here in the audience, that to get young people to read a hard copy book is almost punishment. That's a new way of punishing a student. You'll have to read. The worst punishment is you'll have to visit the library. That's like the inferno. But the next one thing is you have to read a hard copy book, not something on screen. And that loss of material tangibility, I think, is one of the things that Margo tries to bring out in her paintings. That the philosopher I mentioned earlier, Merleau-Ponty, he tried to argue that vision cannot be detached from touch, from tangibility, from the tactile. Or the phrases psychologists have, the haptic, the tactile, that vision is adrift without the touch and without the tactile. And you could argue that reading of a certain kind is also endangered when the material object becomes just a screen in which the words float. And the materiality of the book becomes part of the book itself. And it is a kind of slight contradiction, but a wonderful contradiction, that writers like Joyce, the great kind of avant-garde figures of modernism, in their fiction, more than what became modern in their fiction was their willingness, not only willingness, but eagerness to address the world of mass production, technology, markets, modernity, the city, everything that signifies the world of consumer mass production. But yet, when Joyce got Ulysses published, he did not publish it as a mass marketed paperback. He got it crafted as a book by the Shakespeare Press. And there's this irony among modernists, including Yeats. The first editions are actually handcrafted, remarkable works of art in themselves. So how come Joyce, who was welcoming, what was he welcoming? He was engaging with the new world of mass production and technology. But how come when it came to publishing his book? Now, you could argue no publisher would have accepted it. I think that's true. There's no way a publisher would have accepted Ulysses without making edits. But that is part of the attraction of the art book, is that the artist has a say in the form as well as the content, not just in the information, but in the whole ambience of how you read and how you accept things. John McGarren has his father saying, information, information, information. I've too much information. What we need is knowledge and wisdom on top of information. I don't know, you probably heard this, have you heard this distinction between the three of them? What's the distinction between information, knowledge, and wisdom? Have you heard it? Information is, a tomato is a plant. Can you guess number two? Knowledge is, a tomato is a fruit. What? People say, I thought it was a vegetable. No, tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is, you don't put tomato into a fruit salad. That's wisdom. And when artificial intelligence gets to that, we'll have achieved the apotheosis of wisdom. But that idea that the handcrafted book is the form is part of the content, and the way in which the book has been put together is, in fact, I think, an artwork. As Gabe Byrne used to say, every home should have it. I think rural cottages, along with Millet on the wall, used to have Old Moore's Almanac hanging from the wall. And while Margot's book is not that strong on predictions, I remember people used to buy Old Moore's Almanac and really believed that the predictions were informed by some kind of clairvoyance. Old Moore had some kind of crystal ball into the future. Not just the weather, which was dodgy enough beyond a week, but who were going to be assassinated in July, and so on. And that idea of a book hanging on the wall, the book becoming part of there's something very winning about that, though. And while Margot's book isn't quite Old Moore's Almanac, Margot, if you'll accept me, I think every home should have it. So get it before it goes out of print. Thank you.